Structure analysis of Conrad's The Shadow Line. Our team: Fhirda Melani, Lauw Shereena Lawinata, and Ariqah Hanun Khairunnisa. Table of content. The first is about the book. The second is summary. The third is intrinsic elements. And the fourth is extrinsic elements. About the book. The Shadow Line is a short novel that was written by Joseph Conrad. This novel was written from February to December 1915. It then was published in 1917. First, summary. There was a man that had just retired from his job as a ship crew. He made this decision because he wasn't comfortable and bored to spend his life just to sail at the sea. After processing his retired documents with Captain Kent, the man went to stay at Officer Sailor's home before the ship that took him back to his country came. In there, he met Captain Grace that stayed there after coming back from Solo Sea. One day, the letter of command was sent to the man that was from Captain Ellis. He got a command to go to Bangkok to take a ship back to Singapore because the previous captain had died, and for this command he was the captain. The next day, the men went to go sailing with Mr. Barnes, Ransom as the cook, Francie, Gambriel, and the other crew. But their journey was hampered because all the crew got sick except the captain and Ransom. The weather that wasn't good also became the reason why their journey got hampered. There wasn't any wind, so their ship couldn't move. Mr. Barnes always told the captain that it was happened because the ship was haunted by the previous captain, but the captain didn't believe in something supernatural. Then one day, the storm came and all of them worked together to face it. After that, the situation became calm and they finally arrived safely in Singapore. Second, intrinsic elements. The intrinsic elements consist of theme, message, point of view, settings. Plot, character, and conflict. Theme. Nurgiantoro states that the theme is a meaning of the story which especially explains a big part of its element in the simple way. And The Shadow Line by Joseph Conrad has the theme which is the story of a young man that is at a crossroads in his life, facing the crisis of despair that led him to become wise and mature. Conrad also took the supernatural side of the story into believing that there was a curse on the ship. Next is messages. Message or value is something that we can find and get after the story, something which educated that can give us knowledge about value. The Shadow Line by Joseph Conrad, there are also messages in it. The message is an appeal to readers not to rush into making decisions even if you are still fairly young. Even though you have chosen the decision, you must continue to face it, despite many problems that befall. Not only that, The Shadow Line by Joseph Conrad also teaches us that in reaching maturity, we all must go through a difficult time.
The next point is point of view. Point of view is one of the intrinsic elements in literature, especially in prose, that shows us the perspective that the author uses to deliver the story. According to Clarer, in his book entitled An Introduction to Literary Studies, he assumed that point of view is the way of the narrative perspective. He divided the point of view into three. The first one is omniscient point of view. Omniscient point of view is the outside of the character or the external narrator, or it could be assumed as the third-person point of view. The second one is first-person narration. First-person narration is when the character also acts as the narrator of the story, and usually it can be the protagonist or the minor character of the story. The third one is figural narrative situation. Figural narrative situation is when the character already described by his or her action in the story without adding the commentary. The point of view that people usually use are the omniscient point of view and the first-person narration. The example of omniscient point of view are using he, she, it, and they. And the example of first-person narration are using I and we. This is the analysis of point of view in Conrad's novel, The Shadow Line. Based on the story in the novel, the author chose the first-person point of view by using I as the narrator and also the character. This point of view, using the internal narrator and the character here, is the main character of the story. From the quotation below, we can see that I describe how the story goes by the direct explanation or by adding the comment from how the characters made the conversation to each other. The next point is setting. In prose, setting uses to show when and where the story is happened. Kelly Griffith gives some explanation about setting. In her book, Writing Essays about Literature, she divides setting into 4 parts. Those are: the first one is the interpretation of place. That is the physical setting or the place that in some fiction can affect the character. The second is the time. That consists of 3 parts that are historical period, the passage of time, and the last is the perception of time. The third setting is the social environment that consists of manners, morals, costumes, rituals, codes of conduct of the society, usually affected how the characters thought. The fourth is the atmosphere that can be found in the story when the reader and the character feel the emotional reaction. Without the setting, we cannot know where and when the story takes place. This is the analysis of the setting in the Shadow Line novel. The setting consists of setting of time and setting of place. Setting of time is used to describe when the characters are interacted. From the quotation below, we can see that some of the words like an hour before sunrise, midday, afternoon, and in the morning are the words that used to describe the setting of time. Next is setting of place. Setting of place is where the characters are interacted. From the quotation below, we can see that some of the words like Bangkok, Gulf of Siam, Arbor Office, Melita, and Officer's Sailor's Home are the words that's used to describe the setting of the place. The next point is plot. In prose, plot uses to show us the events that are happened in the story. Clara interpreted plot into 3 parts. Those are the exposition, the climax, and the resolution. As the addition, there are some more definitions from Sonima and Binu in a book entitled Reading Prose. Sonima and Binu classified the plot into 5 parts. Those are: the first one is exposition. This part is when the character is introduced and the setting is established and the conflict is started. The second one is rising action. This part uses to build up the suspense to the climatic ending. The rising action can consist of few events until it reaches the climax. The third one is the climax. This part is when the character reaches the top of the problem. Sometimes it can be the biggest failure, and usually presented the new character to help the main character solve the problem. The fourth is falling action. This part is when the story is already reached the climax and gets the effect from the climax. This part leads to the cooling down and it will reach the resolution part. The fifth is resolution, or the final part is when the character already made the final decision to the story and the final conflict resolved. This is the analysis of the plot in the Shadowline novel. The first one is the exposition. From the quotations, we can assume that the main character was quit from his job because he didn't feel comfortable with his previous captain, and he also bored to spend his youth just to sail at the sea. He couldn't take any longer to stay on the ship, so he made his final decision, even though it's hard for him to leave his job that he loved so much. The second is rising action. From the quotations, we can see that the main character was facing the new problem. He got a call for a duty, but this time he was a captain of the ship. He was chosen by the Deputy Neptune to replace the previous captain that already died on his trip to Bangkok. The main character signed the contract and decided to take the ship to Bangkok. The third part is the climax. From the quotations, we can see that the main character was sailing with his crew, and suddenly on the way, some of the crew had ill, that was cholera. The medicine that already given by the doctor turned out it was a fake. That is why the illness wouldn't recover at all. But the ship was still sailing, so they keep on going. And on their way, there was a great storm that hit the ship over and over, but they must kept on sailing with the miserable condition and also exhausted so that the ship wouldn't sink. The fourth part is the falling action. From the quotation, we can see that the ship already reached the land safely, but the crew on the ship was in a very bad condition. Nobody was died in that trip, but they were exhausted. And the main character or the captain hadn't slept for 40 hours, and he was also standing on the deck for 17 hours. The fifth part is the resolution. We can see from the quotation that the main character met Captain Gills to tell him about his first journey as a captain. And Captain Gills told him that everyone at the harbor already knew about his trip. And he decided to make the new journey as soon as possible with his new crew member.
Now we move to the character and the characterization. Characters show the person that plays or acts in the story. Characterization is the process to make a character has human characterization like the personality and behavior. Now the first character that we will discuss is the character I. I is the main, ground and dynamic character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was a young former ship crew that had just retired from his activity in the sea. Here is the characterization of the character I. As you can see in the first dialogue between I and the chief steward. From this dialogue, we can know that Chief Steward once extorted I because I wanted to order the room that he had before in Officer Sailor's home. But the Chief Steward wants I to pay in advance to get that room. He also tried to deceive I that he also asked everybody to pay in advance. I knew that just the Chief Steward's tactic to get more money. So he bluntly spoke that he didn't want it and didn't believe it. We can conclude that character I has a characterization that is a smart man which can differentiate the right and the wrong. He's also a man that is not easy to be fooled. Now the second dialogue between I and Captain Giles. From this dialogue, we can know that the character I was angry to Captain Giles because he asked something that was privacy for I. He asked why I retired from his work, but I didn't like it. He felt that Captain Giles was crossing the line, but he still wanted to be polite, so he asked Captain Giles the reason behind his question. We can conclude that the character I is a man that doesn't like his past to be lived, but he is also a man that can still maintain his politeness by asking Captain Giles. Next, we move to these two dialogues between I and Captain Giles. From the first dialogue, we can know that Captain Giles actually recognized something, but he didn't notice it. And from the second dialogue, we can know that Captain Giles once again beckoned him something that he must attend, but he didn't notice it again. We can conclude that the character I is a slow-thinking person. He didn't get what Captain Giles hit on him. Next to this paragraph, we can know that the character I signed an agreement with Captain Ellis. He agreed to run the common to sail to Bangkok. We can conclude that the character I is really in love with the sea and cannot be separated from that, even though before he retired from his job and didn't want to work as a ship crew again. But he changed his mind and agreed this time to be a captain that ran a common. He also didn't think twice about it and just agreed to it. Next, this dialogue between I and Mr. Burns. From this dialogue, we can know that the character I didn't believe with what Mr. Burns always said, that the ship was haunted and had some supernatural power from the previous captain. I said that the dead would not have a bad feeling toward the living, so it was nonsense for him. He also said that the previous captain didn't know him, so he couldn't have hatred toward him. We can conclude that the character I is a realistic man that doesn't believe in something that is mystical. And then we move to the second character, that is Captain Giles. Captain Giles is a major round dynamic character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He is a captain of a ship that had just arrived from South Sea. Here are some characterizations of him. From these two dialogues between I and Captain Giles, where the Captain Giles was the one who spoke, we can know that Captain Giles always talked and asked I about his retirement from the ship, but I didn't like it because he thought that it was his past and didn't need to be discussed with him. We can conclude that Captain Giles is a man that has a curiosity and bluntly talking about something. He wants I to talk about his retirement with him. Next, we move to these two dialogues between I and Captain Giles. We can know that Captain Giles ordered I to check about the chief steward because he looked like hiding something behind I. And I felt that Captain Giles was a sharp man that noticed something that felt wrong to him. We can conclude that Captain Giles is a smart and kind man that can notice something wrong and has sympathy towards others. Next, we move to the third character, that is Captain Ellis. Captain Ellis is a major round dynamic character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He is a captain that ordered I to go to the Bangkok. Here are some characterizations of him. From this paragraph, we can know that Captain Ellis is a person that easily to get offended, so there were many of his fellows were afraid of him. He is also an amazing person that many people adore. We can conclude that he is a person that is authoritative in front of his fellows. He is also a sensitive person that made people don't want to have trouble with him. And next to these dialogues and paragraph between Captain Ellis, I, and Mr. R. From this, we can know that Captain Ellis really meant it when gave a person a comment. He even told Mr. R to prepare the Melita ship to take I to Bangkok to get his ship. We can conclude that Captain Ellis is a person that has willpower. When he is determined to do something, he will prepare all the things that support it, and people will comply whenever he says something. Next, we move to the fourth character, that is Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns is a major, round, and dynamic character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He asked I to sail from Bangkok back to Singapore, and he was also sick on the way of their journey. Here are some characterizations of him. From this dialogue between I and Mr. Burns, we can know that he pleaded I to take him to sail from Bangkok. In fact, he was sick and the doctor already said that he shouldn't go, but he pleaded to I that he had wife and child, that he was the breadwinner. We can conclude that he is a stubborn person because he forced I that he needed to go too. We know that he had a family, but by doing something like this also risks his life when they are in the middle of the sea and don't have anything to cure him. Next to this paragraph, we can know that I heard that Mr. Burns spoke something nonsense. He said that the reason that some of the crew got sick and their journey became hampered was because of the curse from the previous captain. We can conclude that Mr. Burns is a person that believes in supernatural power and mystical things. Next, we move to the fifth character, that is Ransom. Ransom is a major, round, and dynamic character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He is a person that cooks in the ship. Here are some characterizations of him. From this paragraph, we can know that Ransom looked like the best seaman in the ship. His manner was good, where he was always disciplined. Even I said that he was so surprised that he just became a cook on the ship. We can conclude that Ransom is a quiet man that looked an intelligent person that has a good manner towards others. Next to this paragraph, we can know that the disease became worse day by day. It spread from one people to another and tortured them. Ransom and I couldn't do anything besides giving them the medicine that the doctor put before they went sailing. We can conclude that Ransom is very helpful and felt disposed to help each other by distributing the medicine, that is quinine. Next to this paragraph, we can know that Ransom always knew what he needed to do. He was getting ready and preparing the man a cup of coffee. I really like Ransom's attitude towards him because by doing this thing, Ransom indirectly told I to take a rest for a moment. We can know that Ransom was a thoughtful man that was willing to do anything and responsible to the captain and the crew as a cook. Next, we move to the sixth character, that is Chief Steward. Chief Steward is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was the manager in Officer Sailor's home that tried to hide the letter from Captain Ellis to I. Here are some characterizations of him. From this dialogue between I and the Chief Steward, we can know that the Chief Steward once exhorted I because I wanted to order the room that he had before in Officer Sailor's home, but the Chief Steward wanted I to pay in advance to get that room. He also tried to deceive I that he also asked everybody to pay in advance. I knew that just the chief steward tactic to get more money, so he bluntly spoke that he didn't want it and didn't believe it. We can conclude that the character chief steward is a miserable man that likes to seek for money in a dirty way. He even is very excited to do that. Next, from this paragraph and dialogue where I and the chief steward spoke, we can know that the chief steward covered up something that he didn't want I to know. He even pretended that he didn't hear what I talked about. From this we know that chief steward didn't want I to know about the letter that was sent from harbor office. This letter was a command from Captain English that was addressed to I. The command was to be a captain to go to Bangkok. The chief steward always wanted to get this job, so he did something like this. We can conclude that the chief steward is a sly and deceiver man. He will to do anything just to get what he wants. Next, to the seventh character, Captain Ken. Captain Ken is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was I's former captain. Here are some characterizations of him. From this paragraph, we can know that Captain Ken was so surprised and sad that I retired from his job. He also knew that he couldn't force I to keep working with him, so with a heavy heart, he let go I to chase for his dream. We can conclude that Captain Ken is a thoughtful man, that he didn't impose his will to make I keep working with him. Next, to the eighth character, Hamilton. Hamilton is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was also the one that stayed at Officer Sailor's home. Here are some characterizations of him. From these two paragraphs, we can know that Hamilton always saw people as an outsider, like I and Captain Gills. He even dared to raise his eyes and eyebrows towards others. We can conclude that Hamilton is an arrogant person that always differentiates each other. Next, we move to this paragraph. We can know that Hamilton was angry because of the talk between Captain Gills and I. He then said that they made him lose his appetite. He left the room afterward. We can conclude that Hamilton is a temperament person that always gets angry and sensitive with the person that he thought as an outsider. Next to this paragraph, we can know that I met Hamilton in the street. From I's point of view, Hamilton looked like a man that had dignity but strict and arrogant. Even people could easily recognize him. We can conclude that Hamilton is an arrogant man that always looked angry and unhappy. Next is the ninth character, that is Doctor. Doctor is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was the doctor that was in charge to look after the crew of the ship Hell. Here are some characterizations of him. From these two paragraphs, we can know that the doctors prepared the medicine for I when he went for sailing. He prepared the drugs, bandages, and other things in the medicine chest that would be very helpful for the journey. We can conclude that at first the doctor is a kind man and very thoughtful. He knew Mr. Burns was sick but still determined to go with I, so he prepared the medicine just in case the health of the crew became worse. Next to these two paragraphs, we can know that Doctor advised I to think twice about bringing Mr. Burns on their journey. He also told him that he could ask Singapore for a chief officer to replace Mr. Burns. We can conclude that the doctor is a kind man and also thinks about the future of their journey. Next to this dialogue between I, Mr. Burns, and Ransom, we can know that the medicine that the doctor prepared for them wasn't quinine. He filled it with something like white powder where it tastes sweet, salty, and bad. That was the reason why the crew's health wouldn't be better even though I and Ransom always distributed them. In fact, the quinine medicine was expensive, so the doctor tricked them. We can conclude that the doctor actually was a mean man and heartless man that tricked the captain and the crew of the ship. Next, we move to the 10th character, that is Gabriel. Gabriel is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was one of the crew on the ship that was sick. Here are some characterizations of him. From this dialogue between I and Gabriel, we can know that Gabriel was one of the crew that was also sick, like Frenchie. I then spoke to him to ask about his condition. There, he explained his condition but still tried to keep excited and didn't want to show that he was sick. He also didn't complain about his illness. He even tried hard to keep doing his work. We can conclude that Gabriel is a responsible and strong man. Even though he was sick and looked old, he was still responsible for his job. Next, we move to the 11th character, that is Frenchie. Frenchie is a minor, flat, and static character in Conrad's The Shadowline novel. He was one of the crew on the ship that was sick. Here are some characterizations of him. The first paragraph, we can know that because of the storm, the situation became chaos. They couldn't see the rope on deck, but Frenchie was nimble that he said that he had a jump or two left. In the second paragraph and dialogue between I and Frenchie, we can know that Frenchie helped Gabriel that was collapsing and told him to lie. He then asked I if he could steer the ship, and I agreed and told him that he would get the light. We can conclude that Frenchie is a helpful man and care for each other. He even volunteered to steer the ship even though he was also sick. Next to this paragraph. From this paragraph, we can know that I looked after Frenchie and he looked very sick, but he still maintained his politeness toward I before he went off the boat. We can conclude that Frenchie is a kind and polite man even though he was so sick. Next is the last intrinsic elements in this novel, that is conflict. Conflict makes the story become interesting for the reader to read. It encourages the reader's mind about what will happen next in the story. In Conrad's The Shadowline novel, there are two main conflicts. They are the disease and the weather. The types of the conflict is man versus nature. Now we move to the one of the main conflict of Conrad's The Shadowline novel, that is the disease. The type of conflict in the quotation below is man versus nature, where the captain and the crew had to face the disease that has indication similar to cholera. Here is the quotation about it. From this dialogue between I and Ransom, we can know that there was trouble in their journey. The crew and also Mr. Burns were sick and showed the symptoms like shivering and burning that were close to cholera. All of them got infected beside I and Ransom. Later, I and Ransom distributed the quinine medicine to them so they could get better, but their health became worse day by day. I then noticed that the medicine wasn't quinine. The doctor tricked them and put something that looked like quinine, and then the disease affected the crew's energy to run the ship. Next, we move to the second main conflict in this novel, that is the weather. The type of conflict in this quotation is man versus nature, where the captain and the crew had to face the bad weather that hampered their journey. Here are some quotations of this. From this quotation from I's diary, we can know that the weather wasn't very supportive for their journey. There was only cloud, but there wasn't wind or rain. That made their journey hampered because the ship couldn't move to anywhere and just lying motionless. Next to these two paragraphs. From the first paragraph, we can know that the darkness come to the ship so suddenly. It became a terror and also mystery for them. All the stars started to dim their lights and it looked like the storm would come. So later I told his crew to close up the ship, and it seemed hard because most of the crew were sick and weak. Then in the second paragraph, what the captain predicted had come. The darkness changed into heavy rain, and all of them struggled together to face and survive from that.
Now we are entering the extrinsic elements of literature. Here are the explanation of the extrinsic elements, where they are divided into postcoloniality, gender, feminism, and identity. The first extrinsic element is postcoloniality. In a book entitled Postcolonial Studies, the key concept, Ashcroft, Griffith, and Tiffin explained that colonialism looked at something, identifying others by looking at their race or their social class. Colonialists used the domination to simplify the humankind and make their own stereotype to show how the people who had the power could make the discrimination. Postcolonialist is looking at this as the unfairness and oppression. They are fighting for justice, that every human being can afford the same treatment in the society. Postcolonialists regret that all the differences of the genetics or the social class aren't the indication to make the diversity becomes one single species. This is the analysis of postcoloniality. From the first quotation, we can see that the Eastern people also controlled the trade at the harbor, and even they have their own territory at the harbor. They also met the white man as their employee on the ship. The Eastern people also gave the job to the Malay pilgrims as the labor, but not on the ship. It shows that they also differentiate between the native people and the European people, because they much prefer the white man on the ship than the Malay pilgrims. From the second quotation, we can see the word peon, that means the native servant. Here we can see that the white people was giving the nickname to the native worker, but they didn't give any nickname to the white workers. It shows that the white people still doing the slavery, or even gave the nickname to differentiate the native with the white man. From the third quotation, we can see that there is some problems where the other sailors didn't fit to the ship. It because the deputy Neptune believed that the only person who could fit to the captain position is I, or the main character, because he was also a white man too. The deputy Neptune assumed that most of the other sailors still think that the white crew was the higher position than themselves. After identifying the text in the story, we can still see on that period people were still discriminating others, especially for the native people. They treated the native people inappropriately, and they still thought that the white men are better people and more educated than the native people, so that they didn't have to respect them. This is what postcoloniality sees and tries to deconstruct, and the discrimination is the main point that must be erased from the people's mind.
Next, we move to the second extrinsic elements of this novel, that is gender and feminism. Gender is identical with sex, but in a cultural way. Gender differentiates human into what we call masculine and feminine. Feminism is the theory which discusses and fights the inequality and stereotypes in genders where women are dominated by men. Here is the quotation of it. From this dialogue and paragraph, we can see that John Niven insults the main character I when he retired from his job. John told I that it was his time to get married with some silly girl. I thought what John said was a nasty thing because John thought woman was a silly girl. We can conclude that John was a misogynist person, which is an issue for feminism. He degraded the dignity of women with his negative attitude and true hatred toward women. This is one of the issues where feminists want to erase from people's mind, especially men. They always disrespect women in a bad way.
Next is identity. According to Barker's book entitled Cultural Studies, he explained that identity is the name of one's true self, where it is collective and made outside of the history, descendant, and a set of common symbols. And by this paragraph, we can know identity of Bangkok's people. In Bangkok, one of the characters saw a great gilt pagoda, and there was a Bangkok's people signatures house which was made from bamboo, mats, leaves, and vegetable. We can conclude that house and the pagoda show the culture of Bangkok people, where it became identity on their society. That's all from us. Thank you.